to our wonderful community at Infidelity Tales Lab. Welcome and thank you. Your presence keeps us motivated. Quick question, what part of the globe are you tuning in from? Whether it's morning or night where you are, let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Mask of Normalcy. Russell Norwood was not a man who tolerated deception. In the high-stakes world of private equity where he'd made his fortune, he developed a reputation for brutal efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to detect lies. His colleagues called him the bloodhound behind his back, a nickname he secretly enjoyed. At 42, Russell had everything most men dreamed of: a sprawling colonial home in an exclusive neighborhood, a portfolio worth 8 figures, and what he had believed to be a loving wife of 7 years. Vanessa had been a paralegal when they met, intelligent and ambitious with a sharp wit that had drawn him in immediately. "You know what I find refreshing about you, Russell," she had said on their third date, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "You don't pretend to be nice." He'd laughed then. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "Absolutely," she'd replied with that enigmatic smile. "Nice is boring. Nice is predictable. You're authentic." That conversation had sealed their fate. 6 months later, they were married in a lavish ceremony that made the society pages. Russell remembered how Dorothy, Vanessa's mother, had watched him throughout the reception with thinly veiled suspicion. She'd cornered him by the bar, her diamonds catching the light as she leaned in close. "My daughter could have had anyone," she'd whispered, her breath heavy with champagne. "Just remember that." Russell had simply smiled and walked away. Dorothy Perkins was old Boston money with nothing left but the name. He knew she'd hoped Vanessa would marry into a family with lineage rather than a self-made man with new money and no pedigree. For years, the marriage had been good, or so Russell had thought. Vanessa managed their social calendar with precision while he built his firm from a boutique agency into a powerhouse. They traveled extensively, maintained the right friendships, and if they hadn't had children yet, well, they had agreed that careers came first. The first crack appeared 3 years ago when Dorothy's investment advisor ran off with most of her fortune. Rather than allow his mother-in-law to face public humiliation, Russell had quietly paid off her debts and moved her into their guest house. Vanessa had been grateful, effusively so, but something shifted after Dorothy's arrival. "You work too much," Vanessa began saying. The sex dwindled. The conversations shortened. Dorothy's presence became a constant, her influence over Vanessa growing by the day. 8 months ago, Vanessa had approached him with an idea. "Mom and I want to start a small business," she'd said over dinner. "Just crafts, really. Artisanal soaps, candles, that sort of thing. We could use the home office since you're hardly ever there." Russell had agreed, seeing it as an opportunity for Vanessa to occupy herself and perhaps loosen Dorothy's grip. He'd even helped them set up a limited liability company, Perkins Artisanal Goods, and had his accountant show them the basics of business finance. Looking back, he should have seen the signs. The late-night inventory sessions, the steady stream of packages, the new friends Vanessa never introduced him to, the hushed phone calls that ended when he entered a room. But he'd been distracted by the Harrington acquisition, a complex deal that had consumed him for months. By the time he started paying attention to what was happening in his own home, the foundation was already crumbling beneath his feet. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Russell had received a text from a block number while in a board meeting. "Your house is being watched." Not by us. There was no signature, no explanation. Just those 8 words that sent ice through his veins. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The anonymous text message nagged at Russell as he left his office early, breaking his usual pattern of working until 8. He drove home with a growing sense of unease, taking a circuitous route and checking his rearview mirror frequently. Old habits from his early days when he navigated the sharky waters of venture capital with competitors watching his every move. As he approached his neighborhood, Russell pulled into the parking lot of a local coffee shop and called his head of security, Boyd Walton, a former FBI agent who now handled private contracts. "Boyd, I need surveillance on my house. Discreet, starting immediately. Problem at home, Russ?" Boyd's voice was carefully neutral. "Just a precaution. And I need you to pull records for all deliveries to my address for the past 6 months." Courier services, postal, everything. Will do. Anything else? Russell hesitated. Yes. I want to know who's watching my property. Someone's watching you? The professional neutrality in Boyd's voice slipped. That's what I need to confirm. Give me answers by tomorrow. Russell hung up and sat in his car for several minutes, thinking. Then he called his attorney, Philip Maddox. Phil, I need a favor off the books. Those are getting expensive. Russell, Philip replied, but his tone was light. I need you to prepare documentation transferring all my personal assets to the Cayman Shell. Backdated appropriately. A pause. That sounds like you're expecting trouble. Just a contingency. And Phil, I may need you to show up unannounced. If I text you 911 home, drop everything and come to my house with those papers. Russell, you're scaring me a little. What's going on? Hopefully nothing. But if it's something, I want to be prepared. Russell arrived home to find Vanessa and Dorothy in the kitchen, preparing dinner together. An unusual sight. They both startled when he walked in. You're home early, Vanessa said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Thought I'd surprise you. Russell kissed her cheek, noticing how she subtly pulled away. Something smells good. Coke au vin, Dorothy said, her hands fidgeting with her apron. Vanessa's been taking French cooking classes. This was news to Russell. Have you? Where? Just online, Vanessa replied quickly. Something to do while you're working. Russell nodded, watching them exchange glances. Mind if I check some emails in the office before dinner? Actually, Vanessa said, we have inventory spread out everywhere in there. It's a mess. Why don't you use the study instead? Sure. Russell smiled. No problem. He walked upstairs to the study, which overlooked the driveway, and watched as a dark sedan drove slowly past the house, then circled back and parked across the street. The windows were tinted, but he could make out the silhouette of someone watching the house. That night, after Vanessa fell asleep, Russell slipped out of bed and made his way to the home office. The door was locked, another recent change. Using the spare key he'd quietly made weeks earlier, he let himself in. The room had been transformed. What had once been his workspace now looked like a small factory. There were boxes of packaging materials, label makers, and various crafting supplies. But in the corner, partially hidden behind a folding screen, sat something that made his blood run cold. A professional-grade heat press and what appeared to be a specialized printer. Russell carefully photographed everything without disturbing the setup, then examined the labels on some of the boxes. They bore the logos of high-end designer brands, Gucci, Louis Vuitton, Prada. A drawer in the desk contained sample tags and authenticity cards that looked indistinguishable from the real thing. His wife wasn't running a craft business. She was manufacturing counterfeit designer goods. As Russell was about to leave, his phone pinged with a message from Boyd. 2 watchers. 1 FBI commercial fraud division. 1 unknown, possibly organized crime connection. Call me ASAP. Russell quietly locked the office and returned to bed, lying awake beside his sleeping wife. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them formed a picture he wanted to see. The next morning, Russell received a detailed report from Boyd. The unknown watcher was connected to the Vitali crime family, specifically to their counterfeiting operations. The delivery records showed regular packages from China and Turkey, common sources for raw materials used in counterfeiting luxury goods. And most damning of all, there were regular cash deposits into a bank account under Perkins Artisanal Goods that totaled over $300,000 in the past 6 months. Russell maintained his routine, leaving for work at his usual time, but instead of going to his office, he met with Boyd and Philip at a hotel downtown. So my wife and mother-in-law are running a counterfeiting operation from my home office, Russell said flatly, staring out the window at the city skyline. And they've somehow gotten involved with the Vitali family. Philip whistled low. That's federal prison time, Russell. Trademark counterfeiting at this scale carries up to 10 years. The FBI surveillance suggests they're building a case, Boyd added. They typically observe for weeks before moving in. They're probably documenting the distribution network. Russell turned to them, his expression hardening. I need to know everything. Who they're working with, where the money's going, and most importantly, who else is involved. You think there's someone else? Philip asked. Russell's jaw tightened. Vanessa's smart, but she doesn't have the connections to set something like this up. Someone introduced her to this world. He didn't share his darkest suspicion, that his wife's sudden distance might be connected to more than just her criminal enterprise. But first, he needed proof. Boyd, I want surveillance on Vanessa when she leaves the house. And I want to know every person she meets with. Russell, Philip said cautiously, what exactly are you planning? Russell's face was a mask of cold determination. I'm planning to find out who's trying to set me up to take the fall, and then I'm going to make sure they regret it. Chapter 3. The Setup. Russell spent the next 3 days maintaining the illusion of normalcy while gathering intelligence. Boyd's team followed Vanessa to a series of meetings, including one with a man identified as Maxwell Lobo Wallace, a mid-level operative in the Vitali organization who specialized in distribution of counterfeit goods. More troubling was her meeting with a man Boyd couldn't immediately identify. Tall, well-dressed, driving a Maserati. They met at an upscale hotel bar in the financial district and, based on the surveillance photos, seemed intimately familiar with each other. Got a name for our mystery man, Boyd said, calling Russell while he was at lunch with clients. Anthony Keller. Goes by Tony. Former customs officer. Now works as a consultant for import businesses. Has connections to both legitimate luxury retailers and the black market. And his connection to my wife? Russell asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the growing knot in his stomach. Boyd hesitated. They checked into the hotel, Russell. Room was booked for 3 hours. Russell absorbed this information with a cold detachment that surprised even him. I see. Keep following the thread. That evening at home, Russell watched Vanessa move around the kitchen, noting how she checked her phone every few minutes. She seemed on edge, jumpy. Everything okay? He asked, sipping his bourbon. You seem distracted. Just busy with the business, she said, not meeting his eyes. We have a big order to fulfill this week. Anything I can help with? She looked up sharply. No. You have your work, I have mine. Fair enough. He paused. How about we go away this weekend? We haven't had time alone in months. I can't, she said quickly. Mom and I have a craft fair in Providence. Russell nodded, knowing there was no craft fair. According to Boyd, she had a meeting scheduled with Lobo Wallace to hand off a major shipment. Another time, then. That night, Russell received a text from an unknown number. Walk away from the heart deal, or your wife's activities become your problem. The heart deal was a sensitive acquisition Russell's firm was managing, a pharmaceutical company with promising patents. The threat confirmed his suspicion. Someone was using Vanessa's counterfeiting operation as leverage against him. The next morning, Russell kissed Vanessa goodbye, as usual, but instead of heading to work, he met with a former colleague who now worked for the DEA. I need to know if the FBI is planning to move on a counterfeiting operation, Russell explained, keeping details vague. It's related to the Hart acquisition. His contact made some calls. Word is they're moving tomorrow morning. Commercial Fraud Division, with support from local PD. Russell thanked him and immediately called Philip. Tomorrow's the day. Be ready. He spent the rest of the day preparing, transferring funds to secure accounts, and ensuring his contingency plans were in place. That evening, he made a show of telling Vanessa he had an early meeting the next day. I'll be gone before you're up, he said casually. That's fine, she replied, distracted by her phone. Mom and I have a lot of work to do anyway. Russell pretended to go to sleep early, but instead lay awake, listening as Vanessa slipped out of bed around midnight and went downstairs. He heard muffled conversation, then the sound of Dorothy's voice growing more heated. They were arguing about something. Morning came, and Russell left as promised but parked 2 blocks away, watching his house through binoculars. At precisely 8:47 a.m., 4 unmarked cars and 2 police cruisers converged on his property. He waited until the officers had entered before driving back and pulling into his driveway. As he stepped out of his car, he saw exactly what he'd expected. Officers carrying boxes of counterfeit goods out of his home office. What he hadn't expected was the look of rehearsed terror on Vanessa's face as she spotted him. She immediately pointed in his direction. He made me do it, she cried out, her voice carrying across the lawn. Russell forced us to run the operation. He threatened us. Dorothy stood beside her, nodding dramatically, wiping obviously fake tears from her eyes. He said he'd cut us off completely if we didn't help him, she added, her voice breaking. We were terrified. A detective approached Russell. Sir, I'm Detective Cooper with Boston PD. We have a warrant to search these premises for counterfeit goods and related materials. Understand, Russell said calmly. But I can assure you, Detective, this is the first I'm hearing about any counterfeiting operation in my home. That's a lie, Vanessa shouted. He coordinated everything. The suppliers, the distribution, it was all him. Detective Cooper gave Russell a hard look. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me for questioning. As the detective reached for his handcuffs, a sleek black Audi pulled into the driveway, and Philip Maddox emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. Detective Cooper, Philip called out, striding confidently toward them. Philip Maddox, attorney for Mr. Norwood. I must insist you release my client immediately. Cooper frowned. Your client is implicated in a federal counterfeiting operation. Counselor. Is he? Philip opened his briefcase and removed a file. Then perhaps you can explain why Mr. Norwood has been in Zurich for the past 3 months, overseeing the European expansion of his firm. I have his passport, stamped entry and exit records, hotel receipts, and sworn statements from his business associates confirming his presence at daily meetings. Russell watched as Vanessa's face drained of color. Dorothy grabbed her daughter's arm for support. Furthermore, Philip continued, I have here documentation showing that Mr. Norwood transferred ownership of this property to his wife 6 months ago, retaining only minimal visitation rights during his brief returns to the States. He has had no access to or control over the home office where these alleged counterfeit goods were manufactured. Cooper examined the documents, his expression shifting from certainty to doubt. These appear to be in order, but we'll need to verify their authenticity. Of course, Philip agreed smoothly. In the meantime, unless you have evidence directly linking Mr. Norwood to these activities, evidence that would somehow contradict these legal documents and multiple witness statements, I suggest you focus your investigation elsewhere. Cooper conferred with another officer, then reluctantly nodded. Mr. Norwood, you're free to go for now, but don't leave town. We may have additional questions. As the officers continued their work, Russell turned to face Vanessa and Dorothy. His wife's expression had transformed from fake terror to genuine fear. Russell, she began, her voice shaking, I can't explain. Save it. He cut her off, his voice low and controlled. We both know what you try to do. Dorothy stepped forward, her previous tears now completely dry. Now, Russell, don't be hasty. This is all a misunderstanding. Is it Dorothy? Russell's smile was glacial. I think it's perfectly clear. The only misunderstanding was mine, believing you two had any loyalty or decency. He turned to Philip. I'd like to go now. As they walked to Philip's car, Russell heard Vanessa call his name, a note of desperation in her voice. He didn't look back. That went exactly as you predicted, Philip said once they were driving away. But you know they'll challenge those documents eventually. They're good forgeries, but they won't hold up to serious scrutiny. They don't need to, Russell replied, watching his house recede in the side mirror. They just need to buy me time. Time for what? Russell's expression hardened. Time to dismantle their entire operation and everyone connected to it, starting with Anthony Keller. Chapter 4. The Spider's Web. Russell established a command center in a penthouse suite at the Archer Hotel, paid for in cash under a different name. The room's dining table disappeared beneath laptops, financial records, and surveillance photos. Boyd had expanded his team to include a forensic accountant, a digital security expert, and 2 more field operatives. Your wife's been busy, the accountant, a severe woman named Diana, explained as she walked Russell through the financial trail. The counterfeiting operation grossed nearly $2 million in the past year, with money moving through 6 different shell companies before landing in offshore accounts. Russell studied the diagram she'd created. Those aren't Vanessa's accounts. She doesn't have the expertise to set this up. Correct, Diana confirmed. The beneficial owner appears to be Anthony Keller, though he's well insulated. Russell stared at the photo of Keller, handsome in a polished, artificial way, pinned to the evidence board. The man who'd been sleeping with his wife while using her to run his counterfeiting operation. The man who'd apparently decided Russell would make a convenient fall guy when the operation got too hot. What's Keller's endgame? Russell asked. Using my wife to manufacture counterfeits is one thing, but why try to frame me specifically? Boyd handed him a folder. We think it's connected to this. Inside was information about the Hart Pharmaceuticals acquisition that Russell's firm was managing. Hart had developed a promising new treatment for pancreatic cancer, and their patents alone were worth billions. Keller has connections to Meridian Biotech, Boyd explained. They're Hart's main competitor, and they've been trying to block the acquisition. The pieces clicked into place. So Keller was working two angles, Russell mused. Using my home for his counterfeiting operation while pressuring me to drop the Hart deal. Well, I didn't back off. He decided to eliminate you as a problem, Boyd finished. Russell's phone chimed with a text from Philip. Vanessa and Dorothy released pending further investigation. No charges filed yet. They're looking for you. Let them look, Russell muttered. Over the next few days, Russell immersed himself in understanding every aspect of Keller's operation. The man had constructed an impressive network. As a former customs officer, Keller had inside knowledge of how shipments were inspected and which officials could be bribed. He used that expertise to build a counterfeiting empire, importing raw materials and distributing finished products through a web of seemingly legitimate businesses. Vanessa's role had been ideal. A wealthy, respectable woman with no criminal record, whose husband's reputation and resources provided perfect cover. Dorothy, it turned out, had been the connection. Before her financial troubles, she dated a man connected to the Vitali family who had introduced her to Keller. The most disturbing discovery came when Boyd's digital expert, a former NSA contractor named Ellis, recovered deleted text from a cloud backup of Vanessa's phone. It's all arranged. Vanessa had written to Keller 3 months earlier. The FBI will find everything they need to connect Russell to the operation. Once he's arrested, I'll file for divorce, citing criminal activity, and take half of everything. Keller's response. And once the Hart deal collapses, Meridian stock will soar. We'll make millions on our options. Russell read the exchange multiple times, his expression unchanging. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. They've been planning this for months. There's more, Ellis said uncomfortably. The personal messages between them, they've been involved for over a year. Russell nodded, unsurprised. Show me everything. Ellis hesitated, then brought up a series of exchanges that left no doubt about the nature of Vanessa and Keller's relationship. Messages about their future together, about how Russell was too absorbed in his work to notice what was happening under his nose, about their plans for after his downfall. I almost feel bad for him, Vanessa had written. He trusted me completely. Don't waste sympathy, Keller had replied. He's collateral damage. Besides, he'll still have his reputation when we're done. Just not his fortune or his freedom. Russell's face betrayed nothing as he read their intimate exchanges, their cruel jokes at his expense, their detailed plans for his destruction. When he finished, he closed the laptop and stood up. I think we have everything we need, he said calmly. That night, alone in the hotel bedroom, Russell finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of Vanessa's betrayal. He'd given her everything, his name, his trust, his protection when her mother needed it. In return, she'd plotted his ruin while sharing another man's bed. For the first time since this began, Russell felt a white-hot rage building inside him. But by morning, that rage had cooled into something far more dangerous, absolute resolve. When Boyd arrived the next morning, he found Russell dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, reviewing documents with methodical precision. You okay? Boyd asked. Russell looked up, his eyes clear and focused. I've never been better. Today we start dismantling Anthony Keller's life piece by piece. The FBI will move on him eventually, Boyd pointed out. Once they finish processing the evidence from your house. The FBI moves too slowly, Russell interrupted. And they're constrained by laws and procedures. I'm not. Boyd studied him carefully. What exactly are you planning, Russell? Russell gestured to the whiteboard where he'd outlined a comprehensive strategy. First, we cut off his money, then his connections, then his protection. By the time I'm finished, Anthony Keller will have nothing and no one. And Vanessa? Boyd asked quietly. A cold smile touched Russell's lips. My wife made her choice. She'll learn what that choice costs. Chapter 5. Threads of Deception. Russell's first target was Keller's financial foundation. Through Diana's analysis, they identified the main revenue streams from the counterfeiting operation and the legitimate businesses Keller used as fronts. Chief among these was a high-end import company called Lux Verified, which supposedly authenticated luxury goods, but actually served as the primary distribution channel for the counterfeits. Keller owns 60% of Lux through a shell company, Diana explained. The remaining 40% is split between 3 silent partners. Their client list includes some major department stores and online retailers who believe they're getting genuine, authenticated goods. Russell studied the company structure. Who's the most vulnerable partner? Diana pointed to a name, Andrea Moretti. She provided initial capital, but isn't involved in operations. Her main business is real estate development. Perfect. Russell picked up his phone. Time to make a new friend. Through his extensive business network, Russell arranged an introduction to Andrea at a charity gala that weekend. She was an elegant woman in her 50s with a shrewd business mind. Russell approached her with a real estate opportunity, a distressed shopping center his firm had acquired in a portfolio liquidation. I've heard you work wonders with retail spaces, he said, after establishing rapport. This property has potential, but it needs the right vision. Andrea was intrigued, and they arranged to meet for lunch the following week. Over the next few days, Russell had Boyd's team assemble a comprehensive file on Lux Verified's actual operations, complete with documentation showing how the company was distributing counterfeits to unsuspecting retailers. At lunch, Russell waited until after their business discussion before casually mentioning, I understand you're an investor in Lux Verified. Andrea nodded, sipping her wine. A small stake. Anthony Keller manages most of it. Do you know Anthony? Not personally, Russell replied, but I've been learning a great deal about his operation recently. He slid a folder across the table. Andrea opened it, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock to alarm as she paged through the contents. This can't be right, she whispered. Every document in that file is authentic, Russell assured her. Lux is selling counterfeits to legitimate retailers. When this breaks, and it will break, everyone involved faces federal charges and civil lawsuits that will run into the millions. Andrea's face had gone pale. What do you want? 2 things. First, sell your stake in Lux to my holding company for $1, effective immediately. Second, introduce me to the other partners as someone interested in investing. Why would you want it on a business that's about to collapse? Russell smiled thinly. Let me worry about that. Do we have a deal, or would you prefer I take this information to the FBI? By the end of the week, Russell owned 40% of Lux Verified and had meetings scheduled with the remaining partners. Each received the same evidence and the same offer. By the following Friday, Russell controlled 100% of Keller's primary distribution channel without Keller knowing anything had changed. Simultaneously, Russell moved against Keller's relationship with the Vitali crime family. Through Boyd's connections, he arranged a meeting with Riccardo Vitali, the family's consigliere, at a secluded restaurant in the North End. Vitali was a thin, elegant man who looked more like an accountant than a mobster. He listened impassively as Russell laid out everything he knew about Keller's operation, including evidence that Keller was skimming profits that should have gone to the Vitali family. Mr. Keller has been using my home and my wife for his operation, Russell explained. He attempted to frame me when things got hot. I have no quarrel with your family, but I thought you should know exactly who you're dealing with. Vitali studied Russell with calculating eyes. Why come to me with this? You could go to the feds. The feds would shut down the entire operation. I'm only interested in Keller. Once he's removed, I believe we could establish a more equitable arrangement. You're proposing to take over Keller's position? Vitali seemed amused. I'm proposing a clean transition with better returns and less risk, Russell corrected. My network and resources far exceed Keller's. You find me a more valuable partner. Vitali leaned back. This is the man who's sleeping with your wife. Yes? And you want to do business with us? Business is business, Russell replied coldly. Personal matters are separate. Not in my experience, Vitali said, but I appreciate your directness. I'll consider what you've shared. Russell knew the seed had been planted. The Vitales wouldn't tolerate theft, and they'd be watching Keller closely now. One more pressure point applied. The third prong of Russell's attack targeted Keller's relationship with Meridian Biotech. Through careful manipulation of trading records and a series of anonymous tips to financial journalists, Russell created a paper trail suggesting Keller was engaged in insider trading related to the Hart acquisition. By the end of the second week, Keller's world was beginning to unravel, though he didn't yet realize the source. Lux Verified's operations were mysteriously disrupted by shipment problems and customs delays. His Vitali family contacts became suddenly distant, and a Wall Street Journal reporter started asking uncomfortable questions about his connection to Meridian Biotech. Throughout this period, Russell maintained complete radio silence with Vanessa, though he knew she was trying desperately to reach him. She'd left dozens of messages, each more frantic than the last, cycling through explanations, excuses, and finally threats. You can't just disappear, her latest voicemail said. We need to talk about what happens next. I've spoken to a divorce attorney. If you don't respond, I'll have no choice but to proceed with a filing that includes all your business irregularities. Russell played this message for Philip, who shook his head. She's bluffing. She knows any investigation would uncover her own activities. She's panicking, Russell corrected. Keller's feeling the pressure, which means she is too. Boyd entered with fresh surveillance photos. Keller met with Vanessa today. It didn't look friendly. The photos showed Keller and Vanessa in his car, clearly arguing. In the final image, Vanessa was crying as Keller gripped her arm. Russell studied the photos dispassionately. He's realizing she's a liability now. Everything's proceeding exactly as planned. Philip looked concerned. Russell, I understand your anger, but Vanessa could be in actual danger if Keller thinks she's a threat. Then she should have chosen her partners more carefully, Russell replied without emotion. Now it's time for Phase 2. Chapter 6, The Architect's Blueprint. 3 weeks after the police raid, Russell finally reached out to Vanessa via text. We need to talk. Archer Hotel, Suite 1506, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. When Vanessa arrived at the hotel suite, she found Russell sitting calmly at the dining table, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, looking as though their world hadn't imploded. The room was minimalist, but clearly expensive. Russell, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Have a seat, Vanessa. His tone was professionally courteous, as if addressing a business associate rather than his wife. She hesitated, then sat across from him. She looked thinner than he remembered, dark circles under her eyes, her usual impeccable appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Where have you been? She asked. The police have been looking for you to ask more questions. Have they? Russell raised an eyebrow. Strange that they haven't found me, considering I haven't left Boston. Vanessa fidgeted with her wedding ring. Russell, about what happened? I can explain. It wasn't what it looked like. Really? Russell slid a folder across the table. Because it looked like you were running a counterfeiting operation from our home while having an affair with Anthony Keller and plotting to frame me for federal crimes. Vanessa's face drained of color as she opened the folder to find printouts of her text exchanges with Keller. How did you? That's not important, Russell interrupted. What matters is that I know everything, Vanessa. Every detail of your relationship with Keller, every step of your plan to destroy me, every dollar you expected to gain from my downfall. Tears welled in her eyes. It wasn't my idea. Tony convinced me that you were going to leave me anyway. He said you had other women, that you were just waiting for the right time to cut me loose. Russell laughed, a cold, humorless sound. And you believed him? After 7 years of marriage, you took the word of a con man over mine. You were never home. Vanessa's voice rose. Always working, always distracted. Tony made me feel special, wanted, while plotting to send me to prison, Russell added flatly. How romantic. Vanessa wiped away tears. What do you want, Russell? Is this just to humiliate me before you file for divorce? Russell leaned forward, his expression suddenly intense. I want you to understand exactly what's happening. Right now, Anthony Keller's life is collapsing around him. His business partners have abandoned him. His criminal associates suspect him of theft. Federal investigators are circling, and he believes you're the weak link. Fear flickered across Vanessa's face. What are you talking about? I'm dismantling everything Keller built, Russell explained calmly. Piece by piece, connection by connection. And I've made sure he'll believe you're responsible. That's insane, Vanessa whispered. He'll come after you? Russell finished. Yes, I expect he will. Unless what? Unless you help me complete his destruction. Russell outlined his proposition. Vanessa would return to Keller, claiming she'd met with Russell only to try to extract information about his legal strategy. She would become Russell's eyes and ears, feeding him information while subtly encouraging Keller's growing paranoia. Why would I do this? Vanessa asked, her voice shaking. If Tony is as dangerous as you say. Because it's your only option, Russell said simply. The FBI has enough evidence to charge you both with multiple federal crimes. I'm the only thing standing between you and a lengthy prison sentence. You wouldn't, she challenged, though uncertainty crept into her voice. Russell slid another folder across the table. Wouldn't I? This contains every piece of evidence linking you directly to the counterfeiting operation. One call from me, and the U.S. attorney gets a copy. Vanessa stared at him, seeing a side of her husband she'd never encountered before, calculated, ruthless, and completely unmoved by her tears. What about Dorothy? She asked finally. Your mother is already cooperating, Russell replied. She made her deal 2 days ago. This was a lie. Russell hadn't contacted Dorothy at all, but the shock and betrayal on Vanessa's face told him she believed it. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now mother and daughter would distrust each other as well. I need time to think, Vanessa said. You have until tomorrow morning, Russell replied, standing to indicate the meeting was over. 10 a.m. Yes or no? After that, I call the FBI. After Vanessa left, Boyd emerged from the bedroom where he'd been monitoring the conversation. She'll run straight to Keller, he predicted. Of course she will, Russell agreed. And she'll tell him exactly what I want him to hear, that I'm gathering evidence against him, that I have connections in federal law enforcement, that I'm coming for him. You're using your wife as bait, Boyd observed, not judgmentally, but with professional assessment. She made herself bait when she decided to betray me, Russell replied. I'm just ensuring she serves a purpose. That evening, Russell met with Philip to discuss the legal aspects of his plan. The attorney was concerned. What you're doing borders on witness tampering and obstruction of justice, Philip warned. Not to mention the potential for getting Vanessa seriously hurt. I'm not forcing her to do anything, Russell countered. She has choices. Bad ones, admittedly, but choices nonetheless. Philip sighed. And what's your endgame here? What happens when Keller realizes he's being set up? Russell's expression was chillingly calm. Then he'll do exactly what cornered rats always do. Something desperate and stupid. And when he does, I'll be waiting. The next morning, precisely at 10 a.m., Vanessa texted Russell. I'll do it. But I want immunity in writing. Russell smiled as he typed his response. Meet me at Philip's office at noon. Come alone. If Keller follows you, the deal is off. Everything was falling into place. The trap was set. Now all Russell had to do was wait for his targets to spring at themselves. Chapter 7. Checkmate in motion. The chess pieces were moving exactly as Russell had anticipated. Vanessa, torn between fear of Keller and fear of prosecution, became his reluctant informant. Dorothy, isolated and suspicious after Russell's lie about her cooperation, retreated to a friend's house in Wellesley. And Keller, feeling the walls closing in, grew increasingly erratic. Russell maintained his command center at the Archer, monitoring developments through Boyd's surveillance team and Diana's financial tracking. The hard acquisition proceeded on schedule despite Meridian Biotech's desperate attempts to derail it. Russell attended board meetings and client presentations as if nothing in his personal life had imploded, projecting an aura of unflappable control that unnerved even his closest colleagues. The SEC has opened an investigation into Keller's trading activity, Philip reported, joining Russell for their daily briefing. Anonymous tips about his Meridian connections have caught their attention. Russell nodded, satisfied. In the Lux-verified situation, the new CEO you installed has been reviewing their authentication procedures, Boyd explained. Found shocking irregularities that necessitated contacting all their retail clients. Keller's been trying to get through to him for days, but mysteriously, his calls aren't being returned. The new CEO was Russell's former head of operations, a loyal employee who understood exactly what Russell wanted, a controlled implosion that would destroy Keller's credibility without bringing down the entire business. Vanessa reports that Keller's becoming unhinged. Boyd continued, checking his notes. Drinking heavily, lashing out. He's convinced someone's targeting him specifically, but can't figure out who. Has he threatened her? Russell asked, his tone clinically detached. Boyd hesitated. She says no, but the surveillance tells a different story. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises during their last meeting. Good, Russell said coldly. Document everything. We'll need it later. Philip exchanged concerned glances with Boyd. Russell, I understand your anger, but using your wife as a punching bag for Keller crosses a line. She crossed the line first, Russell replied without emotion. Besides, I'm not forcing her to stay with him. She's making that choice because she thinks it's her best option. And what happens when Keller snaps completely? Philip pressed. He has connections to violent criminals. This could escalate beyond your control. Russell smiled thinly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The next phase of Russell's plan targeted the fragile alliance between Keller and the Vitali family. Using information obtained from Vanessa, Russell identified a warehouse in South Boston where a major shipment of counterfeit goods was being stored. Through an untraceable burner phone, he contacted Ricardo Vitali. Warehouse 17 on Dorchester Avenue. Tonight, Keller's moving the merchandise without your knowledge, bringing in his own people. Within hours, surveillance showed Vitali family soldiers converging on the warehouse. The resulting confrontation with Keller's men escalated into violence that required police intervention. 3 arrests were made, none of them Vitali associates, who had vanished before authorities arrived. Russell watched the news coverage with satisfaction. The incident would be the final nail in Keller's relationship with the Vitali family, who prized discretion above all. The following day, Vanessa called Russell in a panic. Tony knows, she said, her voice trembling. He knows I've been feeding you information. He found the burner phone you gave me. Where are you now? Russell asked calmly. In the bathroom at his condo. He's in the other room, talking to someone on the phone. Russell, he's saying he's going to make an example of me. I think he's going to hurt me. Stay calm, Russell instructed. Is there a window in the bathroom? Yes, but it's small and we're on the 5th floor. Lock the door. Tell him you're taking a shower. Then text me his exact address. I'll have someone there in 10 minutes. After hanging up, Russell turned to Boyd. Send Martinez to extract her. Then leak Keller's address to Detective Cooper. Anonymous tip about counterfeit goods. Boyd frowned. You're saving her? I'm ensuring she remains useful, Russell corrected, and creating the perfect opportunity to deliver Keller to the authorities. 30 minutes later, Boyd received confirmation that Martinez had successfully extracted Vanessa through the bathroom window using equipment from his former SWAT days. She was being brought to a safe house, shaken but unharmed. Meanwhile, Boston PD was surrounding Keller's building based on the anonymous tip. The timing couldn't have been better. Keller's rage at Vanessa's betrayal had led him to pull out his entire inventory of counterfeit samples and authentication materials, which were spread across his dining room table when police knocked on his door. Russell watched the feed from a traffic camera across from Keller's building, satisfaction coursing through him as he saw Keller being led out in handcuffs. Now what? Philip asked. Now we move to the final phase, Russell replied, ensuring none of them ever recover from this. When Vanessa arrived at the safe house, Russell was waiting. She looked terrible, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, a bruise forming on her cheek where Keller had struck her. You set me up, she accused, her voice hoarse from crying. You knew he'd figure it out. I anticipated it as a possibility, Russell acknowledged without remorse. But you're alive, and Keller is in custody. That's what matters. What matters? Vanessa laughed bitterly. My life is destroyed. I could go to prison. I have nothing left. That's not entirely true, Russell said, sliding a document across the table. This is a one-way ticket to Barcelona, a new passport in the name of Victoria Peters, and access to an account with enough money to start over. The account will be funded after you sign these papers. The papers were divorce documents, devastatingly one-sided. Vanessa would relinquish all claims to Russell's assets and business interests. She would admit to the counterfeiting operation and her affair in writing. She would agree never to contact Russell again or to return to the United States. This is blackmail, she whispered. This is mercy, Russell corrected. You could be facing federal charges carrying up to 20 years. Instead, you get a new life far away from here. All you have to do is sign. Vanessa stared at the documents, then at her husband, this cold stranger who had once loved her. Was any of it real? She asked quietly. Us, I mean. For a moment, something flickered in Russell's eyes, a ghost of the man he'd been before her betrayal. Then it vanished, replaced by implacable resolve. It doesn't matter now, he said. Sign the papers, Vanessa. It's your only way out. With a shaking hand, she signed each page. When she finished, Russell collected the documents without another word and walked to the door. Russell, she called after him. Will I ever see you again? He paused, his back to her. If you do, it means you've broken our agreement. And trust me, Vanessa, you don't want to find out what happens then. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Anthony Keller sat in an interrogation room at Boston Police Headquarters, his designer suit rumpled, his confident facade cracking. Across from him, Detective Cooper reviewed the evidence gathered from Keller's condo, samples of counterfeit goods, authentication materials, and financial records linking him to the distribution network. You're looking at multiple federal charges, Cooper explained. Trademark counterfeiting, conspiracy, interstate transport of stolen property. The U.S. Attorney's Office is talking about a 15-year minimum sentence. Keller leaned forward, desperation in his eyes. Look, I can give you bigger fish. The Vitali family's entire operation. Names, dates, everything. We're listening, Cooper said, though his expression suggested skepticism. First, I want a deal in writing. Reduced charges, witness protection. Cooper nodded to his partner, who left the room, presumably to consult with prosecutors. In reality, he wanted to make a call that would ensure word of Keller's offer reached Ricardo Vitali within the hour. Across town, Russell met with the board of Lux Verified, now fully under his control. The company's legitimate business, authenticating luxury goods, would continue under new management with enhanced procedures. The counterfeiting operation had been surgically excised, with all evidence pointing solely to Keller. The company's reputation will take a hit initially, Russell acknowledged to the board members, all recently installed allies. But we'll position it as a necessary cleansing after discovering Keller's deception. Within 6 months, Lux will be the gold standard for authentication because we'll have proven our commitment to integrity. As Russell left the meeting, Boyd called with an update. Keller's trying to flip on the Vitalis. Word's already spreading in their organization. Perfect, Russell replied. And Dorothy? Still at her friend's house in Wellesley. She's been calling Vanessa nonstop since yesterday, but obviously getting no response. It's time to bring her in, Russell decided. Have Martinez pick her up. Use whatever story works. Dorothy Perkins arrived at the safe house 2 hours later, escorted by Martinez, who had convinced her that Vanessa was in trouble and needed her mother. Instead, she found Russell waiting in a sparsely furnished living room. Where's Vanessa? She demanded, her imperious manner intact despite the circumstances. Gone, Russell replied simply. And if she's smart, she won't come back. Dorothy's face paled. What have you done? What have I done? Russell laughed without humor. That's rich coming from the woman who helped set me up to take the fall for a federal crime. It wasn't my idea, Dorothy protested quickly. Tony Keller approached me after my investment troubles. He said it would be easy money, just using the home office when you weren't around. Then it escalated to framing me for everything while your daughter slept with him, Russell finished coldly. Yes, I'm aware of how it escalated. Dorothy sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 67 years. What happens now? Are you going to turn me in? Russell studied his mother-in-law, this woman who had looked down on him from the moment they met, who had never thought him good enough for her daughter despite his success and generosity. That depends entirely on you, Dorothy, he said finally. I'm prepared to offer you the same deal Vanessa took, a new identity, enough money to live comfortably far away from here, in exchange for signing some papers and disappearing permanently. And if I refuse? Russell slid a folder across the coffee table. Then these documents go to the FBI. They detail your involvement from the beginning, including your prior knowledge of the counterfeiting operation, your introduction of Keller to Vanessa, and your role in planning to frame me. Dorothy opened the folder with trembling hands. These are lies, she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her. Are they? Russell raised an eyebrow. Vanessa has already provided a sworn statement implicating you as the mastermind. It's her word against yours. Who do you think they'll believe? The daughter who fled the country, or the mother who stayed behind to collect the spoils? It was another lie. Vanessa had signed no such statement, but Dorothy had no way of knowing that. The seed of betrayal Russell had planted earlier bloomed into full certainty in Dorothy's mind. Her own daughter had sacrificed her to save herself. You're a monster, Dorothy said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I'm a survivor, Russell corrected. Something you taught me to be, ironically enough. Now, do we have a deal? The next day, Dorothy boarded a flight to Amsterdam with a new passport in the name of Elizabeth Reynolds. The lakeside cottage she'd always dreamed of owning would be waiting for her, comfortable but modest, far from the luxury she'd once known. She would never see her daughter again. Meanwhile, Anthony Keller's situation deteriorated rapidly. His attempt to trade information on the Vitali family earned him protective custody, but also a target on his back. 2 guards at the holding facility were on Riccardo Vitali's payroll, and word of Keller's cooperation spread quickly through the criminal underworld. Prosecutors, eager to build a case against the Vitali organization, moved Keller to a secure location to finalize his cooperation agreement. The transport van never arrived at its destination. It was found abandoned on a service road, the 2 U.S. Marshals unconscious from drug coffee, Keller nowhere to be found. 3 days later, Keller's body washed up on the shores of Boston Harbor, bearing the hallmarks of a thorough interrogation before death. The message was clear to anyone else who might consider betraying the Vitali family. Russell received the news with quiet satisfaction. Everything had unfolded according to his design. Keller had been eliminated by the very criminals he'd partnered with. Vanessa and Dorothy were exiled, never to return. The hard acquisition had closed successfully, generating millions in fees for Russell's firm. And Lux Verified, now under his control, was being repositioned as an industry leader in authenticating luxury goods. As Russell sat in his office reviewing the final reports, Philip entered with a concerned expression. "It's over, Russell," he said quietly. "You've won. Completely and utterly." "Yes," Russell agreed, his face betraying no emotion. "Justice has been served." Philip sat across from him. "Has it? Or is this just revenge? Is there a difference?" Russell asked mildly. "I think you know there is," Philip replied. "Justice restores. Revenge destroys. And I'm worried about what this has done to you." Russell considered this. "They try to take everything from me, Philip, my freedom, my reputation, my company. They would have watched me go to prison without a moment's remorse. And now they've lost everything instead," Philip acknowledged. "But at what cost to you? The Russell I knew before this. He was tough, yes, even ruthless in business. But there was a line he wouldn't cross. That Russell died the day his wife pointed at him and said, 'He made me do it,'" Russell replied coldly. "This is who I am now. Someone who ensures his enemies don't get second chances." Philip sighed, recognizing the futility of his concern. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild," Russell said simply. "On my terms, without distractions or vulnerabilities." As Philip left, Russell turned to the window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. He felt neither triumph nor regret, only a cold certainty that he had done what was necessary. The world had shown him its true nature, and he had adapted accordingly. Never again would he allow himself to be vulnerable. Never again would he trust without verification. And never, ever would he forgive those who betrayed him. The Russell Norwood who had believed in second chances was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned the ultimate lesson. Mercy was a luxury reserved for the weak, and he had no intention of ever being weak again. Chapter 9. Ashes to Ashes. 6 months passed. Boston's brutal winter had given way to spring, but Russell Norwood remained cold as ice. His business flourished. The hard acquisition had positioned his firm as a major player in pharmaceutical mergers, attracting new clients eager to benefit from his ruthless efficiency. Lux Verified had been successfully rebranded as the industry's most rigorous authentication service, its connection to the counterfeiting scandal minimized to a footnote about previous management. Russell had sold the colonial home where he had lived with Vanessa, unwilling to remain in a space tainted by betrayal. His new penthouse in a downtown high-rise offered panoramic views of the city and absolute privacy. The interior was minimalist, almost austere. No photographs, no mementos, nothing personal. It was less a home than a fortress. On a warm May evening, Russell sat on his balcony reviewing quarterly projections when his private line rang. Only 5 people had this number, and none called without good reason. Norwood, he answered. It's Boyd. We have a situation. Vanessa's back in Boston. Russell's expression didn't change, but his grip on the phone tightened. Explain. She flew in yesterday under her Victoria Peters identity. She's staying at the Mandarin Oriental. From what we can gather, she's nearly out of money. That's impossible, Russell said coldly. The account I set up had enough to last years if managed properly. Apparently, she wasn't careful. Also, she's not alone. She has a child with her. A boy, approximately 4 months old. Russell closed his eyes briefly, processing this information. Monitor her movements. No contact. I'll handle this personally. He hung up and walked to his desk, opening a drawer that contained a single file, the complete dossier on Vanessa's new identity. Every detail of her exile had been meticulously planned, including the establishment of an offshore account that would provide a comfortable living in Barcelona. If she had exhausted those funds in just 6 months, she had been catastrophically irresponsible. The child complicated matters. Given the timing, it could only be Keller's. Russell felt no emotional response to this revelation, just another variable to be managed. The next morning, Russell had Boyd book him a suite at the Mandarin Oriental, 2 floors above Vanessa's room. He checked in under a false name and waited for Boyd's team to report on her routine. According to their surveillance, she left the hotel every morning, visiting various financial institutions and law offices, returning frustrated each time. On the 3rd day, Russell decided it was time. He had Boyd call Vanessa's room, impersonating the hotel manager, requesting she come to the main restaurant to discuss an issue with her bill. When she arrived, she would find Russell waiting instead. Vanessa appeared exactly at the arranged time, the baby carrier in her hand. She looked thinner than Russell remembered, her once immaculate appearance now showing signs of strain. The confident socialite had been replaced by a woman clearly struggling to maintain appearances. She froze when she saw him, her face draining of color. "Hello, Vanessa," Russell said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please sit down. We have matters to discuss." After a moment's hesitation, she sat, placing the carrier beside her. Inside, the baby slept peacefully, unaware of the tension surrounding him. "You broke our agreement," Russell began without preamble. "The terms were explicit. You were never to return to the United States." "I had no choice," Vanessa replied, her voice low. "The money's gone. The account was emptied 3 months ago." Russell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Impossible. I set up that account myself. No one could access it but you." "Someone did," Vanessa insisted. "I woke up one morning and it was empty. Every penny gone. I tried to contact the bank, but suddenly my documentation wasn't valid anymore. It was like Victoria Peters never existed." Russell studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he pulled out his phone and sent a text to Diana, instructing her to investigate the account immediately. "Even if what you're saying is true," Russell continued, "returning here violated our agreement. You know the consequences. Vanessa's eyes flashed with a spark of her old defiance. What are you going to do, Russell? Turn me in? You'd be implicating yourself. Don't test me, Vanessa. I promise there will be consequences if you returned. And there will be. She leaned forward. I'm not afraid of you anymore. I've lost everything already. My home, my mother, my identity. The only thing I have left is my son, and I will do anything to protect him. The baby stirred in his carrier, making small whimpering sounds. Vanessa automatically reached to rock him, her maternal instincts momentarily superseding the confrontation. Keller's child, Russell observed dispassionately. His name is Michael, Vanessa said, a protective edge at her voice. And yes, biologically Tony is his father, but Tony never knew about him. I found out I was pregnant after I left the country. Russell's phone vibrated with a message from Diana. Account emptied 3 months ago. Professional job. Traced to operation in Russia. More details coming. It seems you're telling the truth about the money, Russell acknowledged. The question is, what do we do now? I need help. Russell, Vanessa admitted, swallowing her pride. Just enough to start over somewhere. Not Barcelona, obviously. Somewhere I can raise Michael safely. Russell considered her request, weighing variables dispassionately. And why should I help you? After everything you did? Because despite what you've become, I don't believe you want an innocent child to suffer for his parents' mistakes. The baby was fully awake now, looking around with curious eyes. Russell found himself meeting that innocent gaze, seeing neither Vanessa nor Keller, but simply a child untainted by their crimes. After a long moment, Russell reached a decision. I'll establish a trust for the child, administered by a third party, accessible only for his education and essential needs. You will receive a modest stipend as his guardian, contingent on you remaining at least 3,000 miles from Boston. That's it, Vanessa asked, incredulous. I'm supposed to live on a modest stipend while raising a child alone? You're supposed to be grateful you're not in federal prison, Russell countered coldly. This arrangement is for the child's benefit, not yours. If you refuse, I'll walk away, and you can explain to the FBI why you're back in the country with fraudulent identification. Vanessa stared at him, searching for any hint of the man she had married. Finding none, she nodded slowly. You really meant it, didn't you? What you said that day at the safe house. You'll never forgive me. Forgiveness implies I still care enough to resent you, Russell replied. I don't. You're simply a loose end that needs tying up. As they finalized the details of the arrangement, Russell maintained his detached demeanor. The trust would be established immediately, with the first payments available within 48 hours. Enough time for Vanessa to be on a plane far away from Boston. When everything was settled, Vanessa gathered her things to leave, then paused. You know what the saddest part is, Russell? I really did love you once. Before Tony, before all of it. I wish you could believe that. Russell met her gaze with empty eyes. What you believe you felt is irrelevant. Actions define truth, not sentiments. Your actions spoke clearly. Vanessa nodded sadly. So do yours. She lifted the baby carrier. Goodbye, Russell. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're looking for. I'm not looking for anything, he replied. I've already found what matters, absolute self-reliance. After she left, Russell remained at the table, gazing out at the Boston skyline. He felt no triumph, no closure, no satisfaction, just the quiet certainty that another potential threat had been neutralized. That evening, Russell sat alone in his penthouse, reviewing the final details of Vanessa's departure. She would be on a flight to Seattle the next morning, with connections to the trust already established. The child would be provided for, and Vanessa would be kept on a tight enough leash to ensure her compliance. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Few people knew his address, and none would visit unannounced. Cautiously, he checked the security camera to find Philip standing in the hallway. This is unexpected, Russell said as he opened the door. Philip entered, glancing around at the Spartan interior. Nice place. Very efficient. Why are you here, Philip? The attorney set his briefcase on the counter. Boyd told me about Vanessa. I wanted to make sure you were handling it appropriately. The situation is resolved, Russell replied flatly. She'll be gone by morning. Philip studied his client, concern evident in his expression. When this all started, I understood your anger. The betrayal, the setup, anyone would want revenge. But it's been 6 months, Russell. You've won. Completely. Yet you're still. Still what? Russell challenged. Still at war. Philip finished. Except there's no one left to fight. Russell turned away. I'm not interested in amateur psychology. Philip, it's not psychology, it's concern. I've known you for 15 years. The man standing in front of me now is just a shell of who you were. The man I was weak, Russell said dismissively. He trusted blindly. He believed in loyalty and love. Look where that got him. It got him a life, Philip countered. He gestured around the empty apartment. This isn't living, Russell. It's surviving. Surviving is underrated, Russell replied coldly. It means you haven't been defeated. Philip sighed, recognizing the futility of his concern. The papers for Vanessa's trust are in my briefcase. I'll need your signature. As Russell signed the documents, Philip made one last attempt. That child, Michael, he's innocent in all this. Maybe someday. He's Keller's son, Russell interrupted. Nothing more, nothing less. I've ensured he'll be provided for. My obligation ends there. After Philip left, Russell stood on his balcony, watching night settle over Boston. In 6 short months, he had systematically dismantled one life and constructed another. His business was thriving. His enemies were destroyed or exiled. He had emerged victorious from a war few even knew had been fought. Yet standing in his fortress high above the city, Russell Norwood felt neither triumph nor peace. The man who had once believed in connection, in trust, in the possibility of happiness had been burned away, leaving only ashes where his heart had been. And in those ashes, a new truth had crystallized, a truth as cold and hard as diamond. In this world, you could have power or vulnerability, strength or sentiment, control or connection, but never both. Russell had made his choice, and he would never look back. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Roland Pierce stood at the window of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline blur through the rain. At 45, he was a man who had built everything from nothing, a construction empire that stretched across 3 states, a reputation forged in concrete and steel. His weathered hands, scarred from his early days swinging hammers, now signed contracts worth millions. 22 years ago, he'd married Brenda Stark, a beautiful college sophomore who'd been impressed by his ambition when he was just a hungry contractor with a single crew. She'd been his anchor, his motivation to climb higher. Or so he believed. Their son Keith was graduating from Stanford with a degree in civil engineering, following in Roland's footsteps. At 21, Keith had his father's sharp mind, but his mother's softer features. Roland had poured everything into giving his son opportunities he'd never had. The graduation dinner was set for tomorrow night at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Brenda had insisted on inviting her brother Doug Stark, a failed businessman who'd been living off Roland's generosity for years. Doug's bitter resentment toward Roland's success was poorly hidden behind forced smiles and backhanded compliments. Roland's phone buzzed. A text from Brenda. Working late again. Don't wait up. He frowned. She'd been working late frequently at her job as a real estate agent. When he'd started Pierce Construction, Brenda had been his bookkeeper, his partner in building their future. But success had changed her. She'd grown distant, critical, embarrassed by his rough edges despite the fortune they'd built together. That evening, Roland sat alone in their mansion in Bellevue, eating takeout Chinese food. The house felt hollow, filled with expensive furniture, but empty of warmth. Keith was still in California, finishing his final exams. The silence pressed against Roland's ears like a weight. He'd worked 16-hour days for 2 decades, missing little league games and school plays, all to give his family everything. But lately, he wondered if he'd build a fortune while losing what mattered most. Roland's phone rang. Keith's name flashed on the screen. Dad, I've been working on my speech for tomorrow. I want it to be perfect. Your speech. For the dinner. Mom said I should say something to thank everyone who supported me. Roland smiled, the first genuine one in weeks. You don't need to thank anyone, son. You earned this. I know, but Keith paused. Dad, there are some things I need to say. Some truths that need to come out. What kind of truths? You'll understand tomorrow. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're the man I want to become. Not perfect, but real. Honest. The line went quiet for a moment. Keith, I love you, Dad. Remember that tomorrow, okay? After Keith hung up, Roland stared at the phone. Something in his son's tone unsettled him, but he pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to pre-graduation nerves. Chapter 2. The Speech That Changed Everything. The Fairmont Olympics' private dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Roland adjusted his tie, uncomfortable in the formal setting despite owning companies that had built half the luxury hotels in the city. He preferred job sites to banquet halls. Brenda arrived looking stunning in a black cocktail dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. But her smile seemed forced, her eyes avoiding his. Doug Stark shuffled in behind her, already nursing a scotch despite the early hour. Keith's running a bit late, Brenda announced, checking her phone. He texted that he'd be here by 7. Roland noticed how she clutched her phone, protective and secretive. When had she become so guarded? Other guests filtered in, a few of Roland's business associates, Brenda's real estate colleagues, and some family friends. The conversation flowed around Roland, but he felt disconnected, watching his wife laugh at jokes that weren't funny and touch arms that weren't his. Keith arrived at 7 sharp, wearing a navy suit that made him look older, more serious. He hugged his father tightly. Ready for this, son? Keith's jaw was set with determination. More than ready. During dinner, Roland watched his family. Doug dominated conversation with stories about his latest failed ventures, always hinting that Roland should invest. Brenda laughed too loudly at everything, her nervous energy filling the room. As dessert was served, Keith stood up, tapping his wine glass. I'd like to say a few words. The room quieted. Keith pulled folded notes from his jacket pocket. 4 years ago, when I started college, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about money, status, impressing people. He glanced at his mother, who smiled encouragingly. But I learned something different. I learned that real success is about integrity, about being the same person whether others are watching or not. Roland felt a strange tension building in the room. Keith continued, I want to thank the person who taught me that lesson through his example, even when he didn't know anyone was watching. Dad, you built everything we have with your bare hands and honest work. Brenda's smile faltered slightly. She reached for Keith's notes. That's lovely, honey, but maybe... Keith pulled the papers away. Mom, let me finish. This next part is important. The room fell silent. Roland's hands clenched involuntarily. I also learned that the people closest to you can hurt you the deepest. That sometimes the people who benefit most from your sacrifice are the ones who respect you the least. Brenda's face went pale. Keith, what are you? 3 months ago, I came home early from school for spring break. I wanted to surprise everyone. Keith's voice remained steady, but his eyes were hard. I found Mom at our house with Gregory Blake, her real estate partner. They weren't reviewing property listings. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Roland felt the world tilt. I stood in our kitchen and listened to them plan their future together. Heard them laugh about how Dad was too focused on work to notice what was happening under his own roof. Gregory called Dad a dumb contractor who got lucky. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Keith, stop this right now. You're embarrassing. Embarrassing who, Mom? Keith's voice cut through her protest. The way you've been embarrassing Dad for months. Doug Stark shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. Kid, maybe family business should stay. Family business? Keith turned to his uncle with cold eyes. You mean like how you've been encouraging Mom's affair because you thought Gregory would invest in your schemes once he and Mom were together? The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Roland sat frozen, watching his life implode in real time. Keith wasn't finished. Uncle Doug, you called Dad a stupid blue-collar guy who didn't deserve what he'd built. You said Mom was smart to find someone more sophisticated. Brenda was trembling now, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Keith folded his notes carefully. I understand that Dad worked his whole life to give us everything, and you repaid him by betraying him with someone who sees him as beneath them. Roland finally found his voice, though it came out as a whisper. How long? Keith looked at his father with sad eyes. 8 months, Dad. Maybe longer. The room had gone dead silent, except for Brenda's quiet sobbing. Roland's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Everything he'd built, everything he believed in, reduced to ashes in his son's measured words. He stood slowly, his chair falling backward. Without looking at anyone, he walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the wreckage of his life. Chapter 3. The Reckoning Begins. Roland drove through the night, his mind a white-hot furnace of rage and calculation. He ended up at his first construction site, a small office building in Tacoma that he'd built 18 years ago. The security guard recognized him and waved him through. Standing in the shadow of concrete and steel that bore his signature, Roland felt something crystallize inside him. He'd been a fool, but he wouldn't be a victim. His phone rang constantly. Brenda, Doug, even some of the dinner guests. He ignored them all except one. Dad. Keith's voice was tentative. Are you safe? I'm at a hotel. Dad, I'm sorry I had to. Don't apologize. You did what I should have done months ago. Roland's voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. You chose a side. I won't forget that. What are you going to do? Roland stared at the building he'd created from nothing. I'm going to remind some people who they're dealing with. He hung up and made his first call to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who'd helped him with business disputes. Marcus answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Roland? What's wrong? I need to know everything about Gregory Blake. Bank records, business dealings, personal history. Everything. When you need it. Yesterday. Roland's second call was to his lawyer, Darren Page, a ruthless corporate attorney who'd helped him crush competitors in court. Darren, I need to know the exact legal requirements for divorce in Washington state. Asset protection, custody implications, everything. Jesus, Roland. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be thorough. By dawn, Roland sat in his office with a pot of black coffee and a legal pad. He'd built an empire by outworking and outthinking his competition. Now he had new opponents. Marcus arrived at 8 with a thick folder. Gregory Blake, 38, divorced, no kids. He's leveraged to the hilt. Big mortgage, car payments, credit card debt. His real estate business is struggling. He's been padding his income by skimming from client accounts. Roland studied the financial records. How much? About $60,000 over 6 months. Small amounts, easy to hide unless someone looks carefully. Who's been looking? Nobody yet. But the State Real Estate Commission does random audits. He's due for one soon. Roland smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. What else? His ex-wife filed a restraining order 2 years ago. Domestic violence charges that were dropped when she moved out of state. Send me everything. Darren arrived an hour later with divorce papers already drafted. I've structured this to protect your business assets. Pierce Construction stays yours, but she'll fight for the house, cars, personal accounts. Let her fight. How long does the process take? If contested, 6 months to a year. If she agrees to terms. She won't agree. Roland's eyes were flat and cold. She'll try to take half of everything I built. But she's about to learn something about me she should have figured out 20 years ago. What's that? I don't lose. Roland spent the morning making calls. To his foreman, Lewis Marshall, giving him temporary authority over construction sites. To his accountant, moving liquid assets to protected accounts. To his security chief, installing cameras and changing locks at all properties. At noon, Brenda finally showed up at his office. She looked haggard, her makeup smeared from crying. Roland, we need to talk. No, we don't. He didn't look up from his papers. Please. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. His voice was conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. You've been sleeping with Gregory Blake for 8 months. You and your brother have been planning your exit strategy. You think I'm too stupid to see it coming. Brenda sat down uninvited. I never called you stupid. No, you just laughed when Gregory did. She flinched. I made a mistake. No. Roland finally looked at her, and she recoiled for what she saw in his eyes. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Now you live with the consequences. The consequences? Roland slid the divorce papers across his desk. You have 48 hours to find a lawyer and respond to these. Everything you need to know is in there. Brenda picked up the papers with shaking hands. You can't just. I can do whatever I want. I built this life. I can tear it down just as easily. He leaned back in his chair. But before I do, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you and Gregory really are. What does that mean? Roland's smile was razor thin. You'll find out. That evening, Roland sat in his empty house, making a list. Not a grocery list or to-do list, but something far more important. A list of everyone who had betrayed him, enabled the betrayal, or would try to profit from his destruction. Brenda's name was at the top, followed by Gregory Blake and Doug Stark. But there were others, mutual friends who'd probably known about the affair, business associates who might try to take advantage of his personal turmoil, anyone who thought Roland Pierce could be counted out. They were all about to learn why he'd risen from a carpenter's helper to owning a construction empire worth $50 million. It hadn't been luck or timing. It had been because he never, ever forgot who helped him climb and who tried to push him down. Chapter 4. Foundations and Fractures. Roland's investigation into Gregory Blake's business practices bore fruit faster than expected. Marcus Webb had a contact in the State Real Estate Commission, and a few carefully placed phone calls accelerated Gregory's scheduled audit by 3 months. They'll be knocking on his door Monday morning, Marcus reported. When they find the missing client funds, it'll trigger criminal charges. How long does he have? Maybe a week to cover the gap before they notice. But he doesn't have $60,000 liquid. His credit's maxed out. Roland nodded. Phase 1 was elegant. Let Gregory destroy himself with his own greed. But it was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Roland had his accountant freeze joint accounts and transfer funds to business entities that Brenda couldn't touch. She'd be shopping for lawyers with whatever cash she had in her purse. Keith returned from California that weekend, moving into a corporate apartment Roland kept for visiting executives. Father and son sat in Roland's study, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. I keep thinking I should have told you sooner, Keith said. You were protecting me. I understand that. Roland poured 2 glasses of whiskey. But now I need to know everything. Every detail you remember. Keith's jaw tightened. Gregory wasn't just sleeping with Mom. He was planning to steal your clients. I heard them talking about starting their own construction company once they got access to your business contacts. Ow! Mom has copies of all your client lists, vendor contracts, everything. She's been feeding information to Gregory for months. Roland felt the familiar cold rage settle in his chest. Corporate espionage on top of adultery. What else? Uncle Doug has been gambling again. Heavy losses. That's why he's been pushing Mom toward Gregory. He owes people money and thought Gregory would help pay his debts. How much does Doug owe? I heard him mention $40,000 to someone on the phone. He sounded scared. Roland filed that information away. Doug's desperation made him vulnerable, and vulnerable people made mistakes. Sunday evening, Brenda showed up at the house with her divorce attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Melanie McFarland who specialized in high-asset divorces. Mr. Pierce, my client is willing to negotiate a reasonable settlement. Your client gets nothing. Roland cut her off. She violated our prenuptial agreement by committing adultery. She forfeits all claims to marital assets. McFarland smiled thinly. Prenups can be challenged, especially 20-year-old ones. Times change, circumstances. The circumstances are that your client is a cheating whore who's been stealing from my business. Roland's crude language was calculated, designed to provoke a reaction. Brenda burst into tears. Roland, please. Save it for someone who cares. McFarland bristled. That language is completely inappropriate. So, is adultery. Roland stood up. You have 2 days to review the prenup and applicable law. After that, we settle this in court. After they left, Roland made another call to Marcus Webb. I need surveillance on Doug Stark. Who he meets, where he goes, who he owes money to. You thinking of helping him out with his debts? In a manner of speaking, Monday morning brought the expected chaos. Gregory Blake's real estate office was swarmed by state investigators, seizing computers and files. By noon, news of his embezzlement charges was spreading through Seattle's real estate community like wildfire. Brenda called Roland in hysterics. They arrested Gregory. This is your doing. Is it? I thought honest businessmen didn't get arrested for embezzlement. You're destroying an innocent man. Innocent. Roland's laugh was harsh. 60,000 in stolen client funds says otherwise. But don't worry. I'm sure you can visit him in county jail. That evening, Roland received an unexpected visitor. Sally Clay, Brenda's longtime friend and fellow real estate agent, stood nervously in his office lobby. Roland, I need to talk to you. About what? About Brenda and Gregory. There are things you don't know. Roland's interest sharpened. Sally had been Brenda's confidant for years. What things? Can we speak privately? They went to his office. Sally accepted a cup of coffee with shaking hands. I tried to warn Brenda that she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen. She said you'd never find out because you were too busy working to notice anything. How long have you known? Since it started? Maybe 10 months ago. Sally's voice was barely a whisper. But Roland, there's something else. Something worse. Tell me. Brenda's been planning to leave you for over a year. She's been systematically copying your business files, taking photos of contracts, building a client database. She and Gregory weren't just having an affair. They were planning to start a competing construction company. Roland's hands clenched. Using my clients and contacts. Yes, and there's more. Doug's gambling debts aren't random. He's been betting on inside information about your construction projects, completion dates, cost overruns, permit delays. Someone's been feeding him information to sell to competitors. Who? Sally met his eyes. Brenda. The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Roland processed this new betrayal, adding it to his growing list of grievances. Why are you telling me this now? Because Gregory's arrest changed everything. Brenda's panicking, making threats. She said if you destroy her, she'll destroy you too. She knows things about your business that could hurt you. What things? I don't know specifics, but she mentioned safety violations, unpermitted work, bribes to city officials. She's been documenting everything, building a case against you. Roland stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he'd helped build. Sally, I want you to do something for me. What? I want you to stay close to Brenda. Let her think you're supporting her. But I need to know what she's planning, who she's talking to, what information she has. You want me to spy on my friend? I want you to choose a side. Because this is about to get much worse, and there won't be room for neutral parties. Sally stared at him for a long moment, seeing something in his expression that made her decision. What do you need me to do? Chapter 5. The Webb Titans. By Tuesday, Gregory Blake was out on bail, but his business was finished. The Real Estate Commission had suspended his license pending criminal proceedings, and word of his embezzlement had spread through the industry. No reputable firm would touch him. More importantly, he was desperate for money. $60,000 to cover the stolen funds, legal fees mounting daily, and his expensive lifestyle suddenly unsustainable. Desperate men made predictable choices. Roland's phone rang at noon. Unknown number. Pierce? This is Gregory Blake. I wonder when you'd call. We need to talk. Man to man. About what? About making this situation go away. I have information you want. You have resources I need. Roland smiled. What kind of information? About your wife. About your business. Things that could hurt you if they came out wrong. Is that a threat? It's an opportunity. For both of us. Roland agreed to meet at a diner in Renton, neutral ground away from prying eyes. He arrived early, choosing a corner booth with clear sight lines. Gregory walked in 10 minutes later, looking haggard and desperate. You look like shit, Roland observed as Gregory sat down. Funny what happens when your life implodes overnight. I wouldn't know. My life's been pretty stable lately. Gregory ordered coffee with shaking hands. Look, I know you orchestrated the audit. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. I don't deny things that are true. Fine. You want your pound of flesh? You got it. My career's over. I'm facing criminal charges, my reputation shot. But if you think that's enough, you're wrong. Roland leaned back. What do you want? 100,000. Cash. In exchange, I disappear. No trial testimony about Brenda. No exposing your business practices. No competing construction company. My business practices? Gregory's smile was ugly. Brenda's been documenting everything for months. Safety violations, unpermitted additions, bribes to building inspectors. She's got photos, recorded conversations, copies of altered permits. Enough to bury you with the city and the feds. Roland felt a cold fury building. And if I don't pay, I go to the prosecutors with everything. Turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Your wife becomes a very cooperative witness against the construction company that's been cutting corners for years. Interesting theory. One problem. What's that? I don't cut corners. I don't bribe inspectors. And I don't alter permits. Roland's voice was deadly quiet. So whatever Brenda thinks she has, it's either fabricated or planted. Gregory's confidence wavered. She's got evidence. She's got bullshit. But thanks for confirming that my wife has been trying to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. That's extremely useful information. Roland stood up. Here's my counteroffer. You get nothing. You face your charges like a man. And if you or Brenda try to make false accusations against my company, I'll make your current problems look like a parking ticket. You can't just watch me. That evening, Roland met with Darren Page to discuss Gregory's blackmail attempt. If he's telling the truth about fabricated evidence, we need to get ahead of this, Darren warned. False accusations can be as damaging as real ones. Can we get a search warrant for Brenda's files? Not without probable cause, but there might be another way. What? A sting operation. Get her to admit she's fabricating evidence. Record the conversation. That would give us leverage and criminal charges against her. Roland considered this. Ow! Use someone she trusts. Someone who can get her talking. Sally Clay's face came to mind. I might have someone. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb had been busy investigating Doug Stark's gambling debts. The news wasn't good. He owes $43,000 to Eddie Torino, a loan shark who doesn't negotiate payment plans. Doug's been trying to borrow against your sister-in-law's future divorce settlement, but nobody's stupid enough to take that bet. How much time does he have? Based on Torino's reputation? Not much. Doug's already had one warning, a broken finger 2 weeks ago. Roland filed this information away. Doug's desperation was about to become very useful. Wednesday evening, Sally Clay called Brenda with a carefully rehearsed story about wanting to help. She suggested they meet for drinks to plan Brenda's legal strategy. Roland listened to the conversation through a wire Sally was wearing, courtesy of Marcus Webb surveillance equipment. I still can't believe Roland's being so vindictive, Brenda complained over her third glass of wine. After everything I've done for him, for his business. What do you mean? Sally prompted. I covered for him for years. The corner cutting, the bribes, the safety violations. I kept his secrets and protected his reputation. Are you talking about actual violations? Or some were real, some I had to create evidence for. If this goes to court, I need ammunition. Roland thinks he can steamroll me because I'm just his ignorant wife, but I documented everything. Documented how? Photos, recordings, altered paperwork. I made it look like Roland was cutting corners and bribing inspectors even when he wasn't. I needed leverage for the divorce. Sally almost choked on her drink. You fabricated evidence against your own husband? I'm not stupid, Sally. Roland built a $50 million company by being ruthless. I learned from the master. The recording was clear, incriminating, and legally admissible. Brenda had just confessed to conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraud. Roland turned off the receiver and smiled. His wife had always underestimated him, mistaking his blue-collar background for stupidity. She was about to learn the difference between intelligence and education. But he wasn't finished with her yet. Phase 2 of his plan was just beginning, and it would require patience, precision, and a willingness to be more ruthless than anyone expected. Because Roland Pierce never forgave betrayal, and he was just getting started. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Thursday morning brought unexpected visitors to Roland's office. Two FBI agents, credentials gleaming, wearing serious expressions and cheap suits. Mr. Pierce? Agent Bradley Clark, Agent Edwin Little. We'd like to ask you some questions about your business practices. Roland's secretary buzzed his lawyer immediately, but he kept his expression neutral. What kind of questions? We've received allegations about possible federal contract violations, safety regulation breaches, and bribery of public officials. I see. And who made these allegations? Agent Clark consulted his notes. We're not at liberty to say, but the informant provided substantial documentation. Darren Page arrived within minutes, and the interview was postponed until afternoon. As soon as the agents left, Roland called Marcus Webb. Brenda moved faster than expected. She's gone to the feds. With fabricated evidence? Probably, but they have to investigate once a complaint is filed. This was the moment Roland had been preparing for. He'd spent 20 years building his company by the book specifically because he'd grown up watching crooked contractors get destroyed by legal problems. Every permit was legitimate, every safety protocol followed, every penny of taxes paid. But Brenda didn't know that. She thought she was married to a man who cut corners like her father had, a small-time builder who'd lost everything to regulatory violations when Brenda was 15. At 2 p.m., Roland and Darren sat across from the FBI agents in a sterile conference room. Mr. Pierce, we need to ask about specific projects, Agent Clark began. The Meridian Office Complex, the Harborview Apartments, the Bellevue Medical Center. Roland answered every question with documentation. Permits, inspection reports, safety certifications, financial records. Everything legitimate, everything properly filed. These reports contradict the allegations we received, Agent Little admitted after 2 hours. What allegations specifically? Darren pressed. Bribery of Building Inspector Kenny Ackerman, falsified safety reports, use of substandard materials on federal projects. Roland almost smiled. Kenny Ackerman was one of the most honest inspectors in the state, incorruptible and thorough. Anyone who'd tried to bribe him would be in federal prison. Agent Clark, I've never offered a bribe to any public official. My company's safety record is publicly available through OSHA, and our material specifications are verified by independent testing labs. Then how do you explain these photographs and recordings? They showed Roland images printed from digital files. Photos of cash allegedly changing hands, documents with falsified signatures, recordings of conversations that sounded like bribery negotiations. Roland studied them carefully. Professional quality, but clearly fabricated. These are fake. Can you prove that? Can you prove they're real? Darren interjected. Chain of custody, digital forensics, verification of authenticity? The agents exchanged glances. We're still investigating. Then we're done here until you have real evidence, Darren said, standing. Outside the FBI field office, Roland made his next move. He called Kenny Ackerman directly. Kenny, it's Roland Pierce. I need to ask you something important. Has anyone approached you recently about taking bribes or falsifying inspection reports? Actually, yes. Some woman called last week asking detailed questions about our inspection procedures. Said she was writing an article about construction safety. Seemed fishy. What did you tell her? Nothing useful. But Roland, if someone's trying to frame you for bribery, you should know I keep audio recordings of all my inspections. Digital files, time-stamped, stored on secure servers. Anyone who claims I took bribes is lying. Roland smiled. I might need copies of those recordings. For you? Anything. That evening, Sally Clay made another approach to Brenda, this time suggesting they meet at Brenda's house to plan her legal strategy. Roland's surveillance team was already in position. The FBI visit spooked me, Brenda admitted as they sat in her living room. I thought they'd arrest Roland immediately, but his lawyer was too smooth. Maybe the evidence isn't as strong as you thought. It's strong enough. I spent months creating a paper trail, documenting every way Roland cuts corners. But if Roland isn't actually cutting corners, it doesn't matter. Brenda's voice turned sharp. Perception is reality in federal court. Once they start investigating, his reputation is destroyed. His business partners will run. His clients will cancel contracts. his company will implode. Even if he's innocent, especially if he's innocent. Innocent people fight back, which means years of legal bills, media attention, and corporate death by 1,000 cuts. Sally shifted uncomfortably. Brenda, what if Roland finds out you fabricated evidence? He won't. I used Gregory's connections to create the fake documents. Professional quality, untraceable to me. And Gregory's okay with this? Brenda's smile was cold. Gregory's facing 5 years in federal prison. He'll do whatever I ask if it helps his case. What Brenda didn't know was that Gregory Blake was sitting in Marcus Webb's office at that very moment, cutting a deal to save his own skin. She's completely unhinged, Gregory told Marcus. The affair was one thing, but she's talking about destroying Roland's life, taking his company, ruining his reputation. Why the change of heart? Because I'm facing real criminal charges, and she's asking me to commit more crimes to cover for her fake evidence. I may be a thief, but I'm not stupid. Marcus slid a cooperation agreement across the desk. Sign this, and the DA will recommend reduced charges. All you have to do is testify truthfully about Brenda's plans. Gregory signed without hesitation. By Friday evening, Roland had everything he needed. Recorded confessions, expert analysis proving the evidence was fabricated, witness statements from Kenny Ackerman, and Gregory Blake's cooperation. But he wasn't ready to spring the trap yet. Brenda had committed multiple felonies, but she wasn't the only target. Doug Stark had been feeding her information, profiting from insider knowledge, and using family access to gather intelligence for competitors. Roland wanted them all. Saturday morning, he made a call to Eddie Torino, the loan shark Doug owed money to. Marcus had arranged the introduction through mutual contacts in the construction industry. Mr. Torino, I understand Doug Stark owes you money. 43 grand plus interest. Why? I might be interested in purchasing his debt. You want to collect from your own brother-in-law? I want to own his debt. There's a difference. They met that afternoon at a restaurant in Georgetown. Torino was exactly what Roland expected. Expensive suit, gold jewelry, eyes like a shark. 43,000 principal, another 12 in interest and fees. 55 total. I'll pay 60,000 for the debt and your silence about the transaction. Deal. But why pay extra? Roland's smile was winter cold. Because I want Doug to know exactly who owns him now. Sunday evening, Doug Stark answered his door to find Roland standing on his porch, holding a manila envelope. We need to talk. Doug's face went pale. Roland, I can explain. Shut up and listen. Roland handed him the envelope. Open it. Inside were copies of Doug's gambling debts, now legally assigned to Roland Pierce Construction. You owe me $55,000. Payment is due immediately. I don't have that kind of money. I know, but I have a payment plan in mind. What kind of payment plan? Roland's eyes were flat and cold. The kind where you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, for as long as I tell you. Starting with a phone call to your sister. Doug's hand shook as he held the papers. What phone call? The one where you convince Brenda to accept my divorce settlement. 50,000 cash, the house, and joint custody of Keith. She'll never agree to that. She's planning to take half of everything. Then you'd better be very persuasive. Because if she doesn't sign those papers by Wednesday, I'm going to start collecting my debt in ways that will make Eddie Torino look like a Sunday school teacher. Doug stared at Roland with newfound terror. The mild-mannered contractor he dismissed as a pushover was gone. In his place stood a man capable of calculated violence. You're not who I thought you were, Doug whispered. No, Roland agreed. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bother to look past the work clothes and calloused hands. Roland turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Doug, if you warn Brenda about any of this, if you tell her about the debt transfer or the FBI evidence, I'll make sure you disappear completely. Permanently. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Doug Stark finally understood who he'd been gambling against. And Roland Pierce never lost. Chapter 7. The Noose Tightens. Monday morning, Doug Stark called his sister with shaking hands. Roland listened to the conversation through surveillance equipment, watching his brother-in-law's terror translate into desperate persuasion. Brenda, You need to take Roland's settlement offer. Are you insane? I'm going to get half of everything in court. No, you're not. He's got lawyers, investigators, connections you don't understand. Take the money and run. Doug, what's wrong? You sound scared. I am scared. For both of us. But Brenda was too arrogant to listen. She hung up, convinced that her fabricated evidence would destroy Roland in federal court. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tuesday afternoon, Agent Bradley Clark called Roland personally. Mr. Pierce, we've completed our forensic analysis of the evidence provided by the informant. We need to discuss our findings. This time, the meeting was at the FBI field office in a more formal setting. Roland and Darren sat across from a full team of investigators. The photographs and recordings have been digitally manipulated, Agent Clark announced. Professional work, but detectable under forensic analysis. The documents contain forged signatures and falsified timestamps. So, my client is cleared of all allegations? Darren asked. More than that, we're treating this as a federal crime. Providing false evidence to federal agents, conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud if digital communications were involved. Agent Little leaned forward. Mr. Pierce, we believe your wife fabricated this evidence to harm you personally and professionally. We'd like your cooperation in building a case against her. Roland pretended to consider this. What kind of cooperation? Controlled contact, recorded conversations. Help us build an airtight case. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my company's reputation. What the FBI didn't know was that Roland already had everything they needed. But letting them build their own case would add federal charges to Brenda's legal problems. Wednesday morning, Brenda received a call from her divorce attorney with devastating news. The FBI cleared Roland of all allegations. Worse, they've opened a criminal investigation into who provided the false evidence. That's impossible. The evidence was solid. The evidence was fabricated, and they can prove it. Brenda, you need to tell me right now if you had anything to do with creating false documents. Brenda's silence was admission enough. Jesus Christ, do you understand what you've done? Federal charges, disbarment for me if they think I knew, criminal conspiracy. They can't prove anything. They don't have to. They have digital forensics, witness statements, and a paper trail leading straight to you. Melanie McFarland quit as Brenda's attorney that afternoon, leaving her scrambling to find new representation. But word had spread through Seattle's legal community. Brenda Pierce was radioactive. That evening, Brenda called Roland in desperation. We need to talk. About everything. I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. Roland, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work things out. The only thing we need to work out is your plea bargain. Plea bargain for the federal charges you're about to face. False evidence, conspiracy, wire fraud. You're looking at 5 to 10 years. The line went quiet. Roland, I never meant. You never meant to get caught. Please, I'll sign whatever divorce settlement you want. I'll disappear, start over somewhere else. Just make this go away. I can't make federal charges disappear, but I might be willing to limit the scope of my cooperation with investigators. What do you want? Full confession, recorded statement admitting you fabricated evidence and attempted to frame me. Complete disclosure of Gregory's involvement. And you sign over all claims to marital assets. That's everything. That's what happens when you try to destroy an innocent man. Thursday morning, Brenda sat in Roland's office with a court reporter giving a full confession under oath. She admitted to fabricating evidence, bribing Gregory Blake's cooperation with promises of shared divorce proceeds, and conspiring to destroy Roland's business reputation. The recording was devastating, comprehensive, and legally binding. But Roland wasn't finished with her yet. There's one more thing I need, he told her after the court reporter left. What? Information about who helped you, who knew about the affair, who encouraged the evidence fabrication, who planned to profit from my downfall. Brenda's face went pale. I can't. You can and you will. Because those people are accessories to federal crimes, and I want all of them. Roland, some of these people are our friends. Our friends. Roland's laugh was harsh. Brenda, anyone who helped you try to destroy me was never my friend. They were vultures waiting for my corpse to feed on. Over the next hour, Brenda provided names, dates, and details. Sally Clay had been secretly recording their conversations on Roland's behalf, but others hadn't been so wise. 3 of Brenda's real estate colleagues had known about the affair and encouraged the evidence fabrication. 2 of their mutual friends had been promised business opportunities once Roland's company collapsed. Roland added each name to his list, planning separate reckonings for each betrayer. Friday afternoon, he received a call from Kenny Ackerman with interesting news. "Roland, you remember that woman who called asking about inspection procedures? The one who seemed fishy? I did some checking with other inspectors. She called all of them, asking detailed questions about bribery procedures, how someone might falsify inspection reports, what documentation would be most convincing. Building a how-to manual for evidence fabrication." Exactly. But here's the interesting part. She wasn't the only one. Gregory Blake called 2 weeks earlier, asking similar questions. Roland smiled. Gregory's cooperation with federal investigators was about to become much less valuable. His participation in evidence fabrication made him a co-conspirator, not just a witness. Saturday evening, Roland met with Keith at a steakhouse in downtown Seattle. Father and son sat in a quiet corner booth, finally able to speak freely. "How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Roland asked. Keith considered the question carefully. "Angry, disappointed, but not surprised." "Not surprised. Mom's been changing for years, getting more bitter, more entitled. I think she convinced herself that she deserved more than what she had." "And what about me? Do I deserve what I built?" Keith met his father's eyes. "You worked for every dollar, every contract, every success. You earned everything through honest effort. What she tried to do to you was unforgivable." Roland nodded. "What happens next won't be pretty. Your mother's going to prison, Gregory's life is destroyed, your Uncle Doug is going to have some difficult years ahead." "Good," Keith said simply. "They made their choices. You might be called to testify in federal court. I'll tell the truth. All of it." Roland raised his glass. "To family. Real family." Keith clinked his glass against his father's. "To justice." But justice, Roland knew, was more than just legal consequences. Real justice was comprehensive, personal, and permanent. The legal system would handle Brenda, Gregory, and the evidence fabrication. Roland would handle everything else. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Expands. The following Monday brought a cascade of consequences that rippled through Seattle's business community like an earthquake. Federal prosecutors announced charges against Brenda Pierce, Gregory Blake, and 3 associates for conspiracy to provide false evidence to federal agents. But Roland's private justice was just beginning. His first target was Joan Macias, Brenda's real estate colleague who had known about the affair for months and actively encouraged the evidence fabrication. Joan had been promised a lucrative partnership in the construction company that Brenda and Gregory planned to start with Roland's stolen client list. Roland's approach was surgical and devastating. Through Marcus Webb's investigations, he discovered that Joan had been skimming money from her real estate clients' escrow accounts. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but totaling nearly $30,000 over 2 years. She's been floating short-term loans to herself using client funds, Marcus reported, replacing the money before closing, but it's still felony embezzlement. Roland made a single phone call to the State Real Estate Commission. Within 48 hours, Joan Macias was under investigation, her license suspended, and her career effectively over. But Roland wasn't satisfied with professional destruction. Joan had children in expensive private schools, a mortgage on a house she couldn't afford, and a lifestyle built on borrowed money. When her real estate income disappeared, the financial dominoes would fall quickly. Roland bought Joan's mortgage from her bank, then immediately called the note due. Her car loans, credit cards, and personal debts followed. Within a week, Joan Macias went from successful real estate agent to bankruptcy candidate. When she called Roland, begging for mercy, his response was ice cold. "You should have thought about consequences before you tried to destroy an innocent man's life." His second target was Patrick Hayes, a general contractor who had been feeding information to Brenda about Roland's current projects. Patrick had been hoping to steal contracts once Roland's company collapsed from federal investigations. Roland's revenge was more creative. He purchased the company that supplied Patrick with construction materials, then systematically delayed deliveries, raised prices, and created supply chain problems that caused Patrick's projects to run late and over budget. Simultaneously, Roland reached out to Patrick's clients with better bids and faster completion times. Within a month, Patrick lost 3 major contracts worth over $2 million. "It's like someone's sabotaging my business," Patrick complained to mutual associates, not knowing that Roland owned the very companies causing his problems. But the most satisfying target was Edwin McGee, a mutual friend who had known about Brenda's affair and actively encouraged her to take Roland for everything he's worth in the divorce. Edwin owned a small construction firm that competed directly with Roland for municipal contracts. For years, he'd been underbidding Roland by cutting safety corners and using substandard materials. Roland's revenge was poetic justice. He anonymously tipped city inspectors to Edwin's safety violations, provided documentation of substandard materials used in municipal buildings, and revealed Edwin's practice of bribing low-level city officials for inside information about upcoming contracts. Unlike the false evidence Brenda had fabricated against Roland, Edwin's violations were real and extensive. The city launched a comprehensive investigation that revealed years of corner cutting, safety violations, and corruption. Edwin McGee lost his contractor's license, faced criminal charges for bribery, and watched his company dissolve in a storm of lawsuits from clients whose buildings failed safety inspections. "Someone's got it out for me," Edwin told anyone who would listen, still not understanding that his downfall was orchestrated by the man he'd tried to help destroy. Meanwhile, Doug Stark was learning what it meant to be owned by Roland Pierce. "I need you to do something for me," Roland told him during a private meeting. "What?" "Gregory Blake's sentencing hearing is next month. I want you to provide testimony about his gambling habits, his debts, his desperation for money." "I don't know anything about Gregory's gambling." "You will by the time you testify. You're going to become very familiar with his personal problems." Doug stared at Roland with growing horror. "You want me to lie under oath?" "I want you to research Gregory Blake thoroughly and provide accurate testimony about what you discover. If your research reveals gambling problems, that's not my fault. And if I refuse?" Roland's smile was thin and cold. "Then I start collecting my debt in less pleasant ways." Doug spent the following weeks becoming an expert on Gregory Blake's financial destruction, gathering information that would ensure the maximum possible prison sentence. But Roland's most comprehensive revenge was reserved for the business community that had been waiting to feast on his company's corpse. When news of the federal investigation first broke, several competitors had immediately contacted Roland's clients, suggesting they might want to consider more stable contractors for future projects. Roland made a list of every company that had tried to capitalize on his apparent downfall, then systematically destroyed them. His methods varied. Sometimes he outbid them on contracts with prices so low they couldn't compete, then used his superior efficiency to stilter a profit. Sometimes he hired away their best employees with substantial salary increases. Sometimes he bought out their suppliers and created the same supply chain problems he'd used against Patrick Hayes. One competitor found himself under federal investigation for tax evasion after Roland anonymously provided documentation of unreported income. Another lost his city contracts when Roland revealed safety violations that had been overlooked for years. Roland's message was clear. Attacking Pierce Construction had consequences that extended far beyond simple business competition. By December, 6 months after Keith's graduation dinner speech, Roland's enemies were either in prison, facing criminal charges, or professionally destroyed. His business had not only survived the federal investigation, but emerged stronger, with new contracts and an enhanced reputation for integrity. But he wasn't finished yet. The most important target remained: Gregory Blake himself. Gregory's cooperation with federal prosecutors had earned him a reduced sentence recommendation, but he was still facing 3 years in federal prison. Roland intended to make sure those 3 years felt like 30. Through his connections in the construction industry, Roland knew people who knew people. Prison was full of contractors, electricians, and construction workers who had run afoul of the law. Men who understood the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. Gregory Blake would enter prison as a marked man, surrounded by inmates who knew exactly what he'd done to Roland Pierce. His cooperation with prosecutors wouldn't protect him from the justice of men who understood that betraying a stand-up contractor was unforgivable. Roland made certain phone calls, transferred certain funds, and ensured that Gregory's prison experience would be appropriately educational. "What happens to him in there isn't my responsibility," Roland told Marcus Webb. "But I want to make sure the right people know his story." By Christmas, the transformation was complete. Roland Pierce had emerged from his wife's betrayal not as a victim, but as a force of nature. His enemies were scattered, destroyed, or imprisoned. His business was stronger than ever. His son respected him more than ever. And Brenda, awaiting sentencing in county jail, finally understood the true nature of the man she'd married and tried to destroy. She'd thought she was betraying a simple contractor who got lucky. She'd actually declared war on a force of nature who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. 6 months later, Roland Pierce stood in federal court as Brenda received her sentence. 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraud. She looked small and broken in her orange jumpsuit, a far cry from the confident woman who had yanked Keith's speech notes away at that graduation dinner. Keith sat beside his father in the gallery, now 22 and working as a junior engineer at Pierce Construction. The young man had testified truthfully during the trial, describing his mother's affair and the evidence fabrication plot with clinical precision. "The defendant's actions represent a fundamental breach of trust," Judge Andres Lowe declared. "She not only betrayed her marriage vows, but attempted to use federal law enforcement as a weapon against an innocent man. This court finds her crimes particularly egregious, given the premeditation and scope of the conspiracy." Brenda's new attorney, a public defender named Lewis Marshall, had argued for leniency based on emotional distress and poor judgment. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mrs. Pierce, you had numerous opportunities to reconsider your actions. Instead, you escalated your criminal behavior, involving multiple co-conspirators and creating elaborate fabrications designed to destroy your husband's life and livelihood." As Brenda was led away in shackles, she caught Roland's eye one final time. He stared back with complete indifference, as if she were a stranger. Gregory Blake had been sentenced the previous month to 4 years in federal prison. Despite his cooperation with prosecutors, the judge had been influenced by testimony about his character, his gambling debts, and his willingness to fabricate evidence for personal gain. Doug Stark's testimony had been particularly damaging, describing Gregory as a desperate man willing to commit any crime for money. What the court didn't know was that Doug's research had been guided by Roland's investigators, ensuring maximum impact. Gregory's prison experience had been exactly as unpleasant as Roland intended. Within his first month, he'd been beaten twice by inmates who had connections to Seattle's construction community. The message was clear: betraying Roland Pierce had consequences that extended beyond legal proceedings. After the sentencing, Roland and Keith drove to a cemetery outside Seattle, where they stood beside a simple gravestone marked William Pierce, 1943 to 2003. "Grandpa would have been proud of how you handled this," Keith said, placing flowers on his grandfather's grave. Roland nodded. His father had been a union carpenter who'd taught him that a man's word was his bond and betrayal was unforgivable. He always said that if someone tries to destroy you, you have 2 choices: let them succeed or make sure they regret it forever. What about forgiveness? Forgiveness is for people who make mistakes and try to make amends. Your mother didn't make a mistake. She made a calculated decision to destroy everything I built. That's not something you forgive. That's something you punish. Keith understood. At 22, he learned hard lessons about loyalty, consequences, and the difference between justice and revenge. That evening, they returned to Roland's house, now truly his alone, after Brenda forfeited all claims in her plea agreement. Keith had moved back in after college, finding that he enjoyed working alongside his father and learning the construction business from the ground up. The house felt different now, brighter, somehow, without the underlying tension that had poisoned the atmosphere during Brenda's final years of betrayal. Roland's phone rang. Marcus Webb's name appeared on the screen. Boss, I've got an update on the others. Tell me. Joe Macias filed for bankruptcy last week. Lost her house, cars, everything. She's working a retail job for minimum wage. Patrick Hayes closed his business. He's working for someone else now, hourly wages. His wife filed for divorce when the money ran out. Edwin McGee, 3 years in state prison for bribery and fraud. His company's assets were seized to pay for repairing all the municipal buildings he screwed up. Roland nodded with satisfaction. Anyone else on the list? Sally Clay sends her regards. She's doing well with the real estate firm you recommended. Sally had been rewarded for her loyalty with introductions to high-end clients and exclusive listings. Her income had tripled since helping Roland expose Brenda's plans. And Doug, still making payments on his debt to you. He's been very cooperative, very respectful. I think he finally understands who he was dealing with. Doug Stark had become a model debtor, working 2 jobs and turning over every spare dollar to Roland. More importantly, he'd become a cautionary tale in Seattle's business community about the consequences of betraying Roland Pierce. 2 years later, Roland Pierce stood in another hotel ballroom, this time watching his son Keith receive an engineering award for innovative bridge design. At 24, Keith had already made his mark in the construction industry, earning respect through talent rather than family connections. The young man's acceptance speech was brief and professional, thanking his mentors and colleagues. But when he finished, he looked directly at his father and nodded once. Roland understood. This was what real success looked like. Achievement earned through honest work, respect gained through competence, and loyalty given freely rather than demanded. In the audience, Roland recognized several familiar faces. Business associates, city officials, fellow contractors, men who had learned to respect Roland Pierce not just for his wealth, but for his unwavering principles and his absolute commitment to justice. Some of them had tried to take advantage of his apparent weakness during the federal investigation. They'd all learned the same lesson. Roland Pierce was not a man to be underestimated or betrayed. After the ceremony, father and son drove through the city Roland had helped build. Construction cranes bearing the Pierce Construction logo dotted the skyline, testament to a company that had not just survived betrayal, but emerged stronger. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom had just been honest about the affair? Keith asked. Roland considered the question. If she'd come to me directly, admitted the truth, asked for a divorce, we probably could have worked out something reasonable. I might have been hurt, but I wouldn't have destroyed her. What made the difference? She didn't just leave me. She tried to destroy me. She fabricated evidence, involved federal agents, recruited conspirators. She turned a personal betrayal into a criminal conspiracy. And you don't forgive that. Ever. Roland's voice was flat and final. Your mother learned what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. She thought she could manipulate me because I loved her. She was wrong. They pulled into the driveway of Roland's house, now expanded with a new wing where Keith lived independently while working for the family business. 3 generations of Pierce men had learned the same lesson. Success came through hard work, integrity, and the wisdom to distinguish between friends and enemies. That night, Roland sat in his study, reviewing contracts for next year's projects. Pierce Construction was bidding on a new federal courthouse, a project worth $50 million. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same government that had investigated him based on fabricated evidence would now pay him to build their courthouse. His phone buzzed with a text from Keith, working late again. Some things never change. Roland smiled and typed back. Good habits are worth keeping. But some things had changed. Roland no longer worked late to escape from problems at home. He worked late because he loved what he did, because building things gave his life meaning, and because success was the best revenge against everyone who had ever doubted him. Brenda would serve another 3 years in federal prison, followed by supervised probation. Gregory Blake had 2 years remaining on his sentence, assuming he survived the experience. Doug Stark would be paying off his debt for another 8 years, a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. And Roland Pierce would continue building, growing, succeeding. Not because he needed revenge anymore, but because that's who he was, a man who never backed down, never gave up, and never forgot the difference between loyalty and treachery. The graduation dinner speech that had changed